Now you hear it.
When you're a child, you learn there are 3 dimensions: height, width, and depth, like a shoebox. Then later you hear there's a 4th dimension: time.
From Seattle, we're Drinking the Movies. I'm Taylor Baker.
And I'm Michael Clausen.
Ooh, that's nice and light and fruity and delicious.
Very tasty. What are we drinking today?
I don't remember the full title, unfortunately, as it was about 3 paragraphs long, but it ended in African Hazy IPA.
From Hellbent Brewing Company, as usual. Delicious. And we're back with our rescreening segment of the show, where we're taking a closer look at a single film instead of our usual 3 films or so. What are we talking about today?
We are talking about David Cronenberg's A History of Violence, which is an adaptation of a graphic novel from the 90s, as I understand it. Additionally, when he selected this screenplay to adapt as a film, he had no idea that it was based on a graphic novel, and has made some interesting comments, such as, if he would have known, he likely never would have done the project.
Oh, that's interesting. That gives you a sense of his taste, perhaps. Mm-hmm.
Yes, this is our 3rd rescreening episode. And as is the motif or structure of these episodes, we will do a first impression of the next rescreening title, which is, Michael?
Steven Soderbergh's Side Effects.
And look at how excited you were to say Steven Soderbergh yet again.
How have things been going with you?
I can finally sleep. I have some energy. We had sex.
Whoever makes this drug is going to be rich.
911, what's your emergency?
I need help.
Someone's been murdered.
There's been an incident.
What do we do?
No sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle.
Where's her lawyer?
She doesn't have one. Just kept talking about you.
I don't understand why this is happening.
You know her?
Would you have treated her differently if she was a man?
That's not what happened.
Em, what is going on?
I'll put her on a Blixer.
I don't think you should be my doctor anymore.
I think she requires more observation.
Someone gets punished.
It's all gonna go away.
It's gonna follow you around forever.
I had no idea this was going on.
Stop! There were millions of dollars!
You've been lying to her, and he was lying to me.
I would never be here if it weren't for you.
I want my life back!
You know I'm not crazy.
Everyone knows everything.
Em, are you awake?
Destroy that before it destroys you.
All right, Michael, that was the trailer for Steven Soderbergh's Side Effects, illustrating current pattern in our rescreening episodes, which is films with violence and complex, physically damaging sequences of sexuality, it would appear.
That is true. I don't even remember if this was my pick or your pick. I think this was my pick.
This was
correct?
your pick.
I think I chose this off your list, or was this?
This was your pick.
This was
you
on
wrote
my
this
list.
down.
Yeah.
Yes, this was you. This was all you. And I was thrilled.
Yeah. I don't even really remember why exactly this had caught my attention when I was crafting my list of films that we could do for rescreening, but I'm very excited to revisit it. It's been forever since I saw it, back when it first came out. I don't even remember it all that well. It's just a film that's just been calling out to me, wanting to be revisited. I love this cast: Rooney Mara, Channing Tatum, Jude Law. Ironically, we're talking about Cronenberg. It kind of looks like a movie that Cronenberg could have directed if he wanted to.
Jude Law was in a Cronenberg film called Existence.
Yeah. I think it looks tight. I'm excited. How do you feel about revisiting this one?
As a noted Steven Soderbergh fanboy, I feel thrilled. It looks luxurious. It looks like he uses a lot of the cinematography stylings that we see him use in The Girlfriend Experience, which I found very interesting in these close-up interiors and those kind of luxury fantasy shots of the yacht on the water. Those are just a lot of things that he did in The Girlfriend Experience, and that the show continued to do with Riley Keough as he served as executive producer. It also has some of those Nicks, the Nick close-ups that he developed in 2014. I'm thrilled, and I can't wait to watch it.
Should be fun. Today's podcast is presented by Podgo. Podgo is the easiest way for you to monetize your podcast, providing podcasters with a flat rate for ad space so you always know how much you get when you include an ad from Podgo. We recently joined as members, and you can too. Apply today to become a member and immediately be connected with advertisers that fit your audience. That's podgo.co at podgo.co.
On to A History of Violence.
They were gonna kill us. You saved our lives.
Hello, my hero.
Tom Stahl is a family man with long-standing ties to this community. Right now, this community is rallying behind him and calling him a hero.
Way to go, Tommy.
Great, more reporters.
You look like reporters. You're the big hero.
Really don't like to talk about it, sir.
You sure took care of those two bad men, Joey.
My name is Tom. Who's Joey?
You tell me.
Sarah? Sarah!
My daughter, where is she?
What's going on, Dad? They thought they knew me. Thought I was somebody else.
Nothing to worry about, Mrs. Stahl. I've been watching over.
I don't know what you want, and I don't really care.
You should care about what I want, because what I want might change your life. But why don't you ask Tom and ask him how come he's so good at killing people?
A History of Violence came out in 2005. It stars Viggo Mortensen, Maria Bello, William Hurt, Ed Harris, among others. When did you first see this film? Back when it came out? Sometime recently?
I believe I saw it the year that it came out, or immediately when it came out on DVD. I subsequently loved it enough to purchase the DVD of it, which I still have in my large DVD case, and I forgot about until this title popped up. Even though it was at my insistence we watched this, I just forgot that I owned a copy and repurchased the Blu-ray for all the fancy stuff with the director's commentary and everything. But I had really enjoyed this. When I was younger, I remember being distinctly moved by the fact that I'd never seen adult passion depicted in the way that Cronenberg does here, with two married adults having consensual, passionate sex, which is, he actually discussed in the commentary, which I found very interesting. He brought it up himself. It's the first time an American film has ever had two people doing 69, apparently, and he thinks it's true. He's not sure, but he'll take credit for breaking ground, according to him. But
his crowning achievement.
I just remember the realness of the passion. And when I was younger, you don't really see those types of films when you're growing up. And so to see legitimate passion that's complex, where identity is being wrestled with, as always is in a Cronenberg film, I think that's just one of those things that just enticed that Freudian part of me.
Yeah, I watched this back when it came out. I remember renting it. I might be repeating some of what I said back when we previewed this in our last rescreening episode, but I remember not being terribly enthused about it at the time. I remember just teenage me, I guess I would have been, teenager, thinking it was not quite action-packed enough for my taste at the time.
It was no shoot 'em up, dang
No.
it. There were no carrots and eyeballs.
Correct. You search this movie and you get phrases like action-packed thriller. I don't know that I would really describe it that way. So younger me was maybe a little meh on it overall, but it's always been one that I've just felt like I would get more out of now, hence the wanting to revisit it.
And where are you on it now?
I'm quite positive on it. There are some things that I don't care for, but overall, I like this movie quite a bit. Ratings wise, I'm giving it about a 4 out of 5, maybe a 3.5. I'd probably go down before I'd go up, but I'm solidly positive on it overall. So just to start there, what about you?
I'm right there in line with you. The first time I watched it, easy 4.5 out of 5. Then I watched it again, and it just dropped down. Like it most films, will drop down on subsequent viewings unless I truly love them, I think. Which is what's very interesting about doing this project, is getting to see, with Rescreening, getting to see multiple times the same film in context to a filmography from a director over the period of a month. And the more I've watched his other work, the more this seems like the turning point for me in his work. I have not seen M. Butterfly or Crash, but this to me seems like his most popular film that kind of was where he went away from body horror completely and began to experience more, or experiment more, with the mentality of identity and how horrifying and brutal identity turns can be. And so while I'm very interested in where this is in his canon, I came down on it. I'm probably about a 76, which the way that I do my stars is 4. If I went down 1, it'd be a 3.5. So I'm right there in lockstep with you. I appreciate this film greatly and Viggo's performance, but there's certain things that I just find materially degrading to the film, like the quality of the ADR from The Sun. His work on the ADR is just absurd. When you're watching the film and you're not caught up in the suspense of your first viewing and you're watching it again, it's very clear that he's doing ADR, that the mouth is not in sync with the words coming out. Sometimes it's closed with his back turn and you can see that his mouth isn't moving. And that's a problem.
Yeah, you landed on the one actor in this movie that I think I don't particularly care for, in a cast that I otherwise think is quite good. I think the acting is kind of a highlight of the movie for me. So maybe just to get one nit out of the way, the character of the son, I do think is one of the weaker elements, in my opinion.
Not unlike the Ken Loach film that we recently covered, in which his whole storyline just kind of seems unnecessary.
The subplot with him and a bully he encounters at school,
and smoking weed with his friend.
Yeah, it can feel a little tacked on. I think he just kind of fails to elicit empathy for me in a scene like where he gets picked up by Ed Harris's character and his cronies, and he's getting pulled out of the black car, and he's sort of
when his back is turned, then his mouth doesn't move. And then in ADR, they have him swear and say, "Get your hands off me."
Oh, nice.
And that's just like... ugh.
That's frustrating. Yeah, I don't know why I don't find myself particularly concerned for his safety in a scene like that, because...
He's not acting nervous.
For lack of a better word, I find him almost a little whiny. Like, I don't know if that's really the best word to describe it, but there's something just a little bit grating about the kind of melodramatic tenor of his performance that I think does not work.
I felt that word and also felt that it was mean to say, but I do think it's accurate. Especially in the ADR, you just get this whininess that I think if you could have had Jesse Eisenberg, would have had the same type, but quality acting perhaps in a non-whininess.
Yeah, for sure. I guess idea-wise, to the extent that this movie is quote-unquote about violence and just the various sort of ways in which violence can play out, different kinds of violence, different meanings of the word, that we get this subplot between him and a bully, I think thematically fits, and especially because we see him emboldened by his father's actions in a way. I think it kind of thematically makes sense. It is probably just one of the less satisfying threads within the movie for me.
I completely agree. But then I'm also interested in the shadows in the locker room, right? There's a little bit of an expressionism going on there that isn't going on in the rest of the film, really. So although those asides and the entire plot I find pointless, there's artistic flourishes that Cronenberg is always delivering that at least intrigue me during those moments that are extremely subpar, especially in the context of his filmography. This is such a unique film in the context of his filmography. You watched quite a few films in relation to this. You watched this, which is his first collaboration with Viggo, in which he did 3 in a row. It was this film, Eastern Promises, and then A Dangerous Method. And then he goes to Cosmopolis, which is his first collaboration with Pattinson before A Map to the Stars. And I think that by A Map to the Stars, there's a disillusioned criticism of contemporary culture, which is expressing itself in Cosmopolis. It's expressing itself in Existence. I think it's here too. It's just, it doesn't feel sincere in the way that it feels when a project is not adapted off of another format. I think that being based on another format kind of corrupted the message here to begin with in a way that, you know, that sounds mean or degrading, but I don't mean it. I just mean, like, it's probably a great graphic novel, and I don't know that it belongs on screen. I don't regret that it's on screen. I just don't know that it belongs on screen.
Yeah. The scene with the son and a friend of his, a girl, smoking on a street corner, you're right, like, not really adding much to the story on the whole. It does at least provide, or it does have one of my favorite shots in the movie, which is when these criminals that we saw in the very first opening of the movie do return, and the bully and these two guys, like, nearly have an accident. I do think that is a great shot, and particularly because it's easy just to have kind of forgotten about those characters until they come crashing back in.
Yes. Because you don't know if they're... Some people might have thought that was the nightmare she was having in the beginning, and so you might think that they're not real. Back to that point, though, that opening roughly 4-minute shot, one take, very substantive. Like, I felt like I became a viewer to a film. I no longer had questions. I just had watching. And I think that's one of the better introductions that he's ever done. And it goes against what he normally does, which is those, like in The Fly, where there's the music and the texture of lighting that's changing shades, or maybe it's changing colors, and you have your credits. Here we have the opening credits over a slow, deliberate one-take shot, which I found very, very satisfying.
Awesome opening shot. Completely with you there. For the movie to only go on and be quite graphic in the violence we see, I like that opening shot is keeping it off screen. We see the aftermath of it.
The bloody handprint on the counter.
Yeah, and, you know, we see these guys come out of a door. The front office of the hotel they're at, it's only like 30, 40 feet away from the door they're coming out of. If there was a struggle, I feel like you would have heard it. There's something kind of just chilling about the fact that there's no sound of what we then see has happened, which is, you know, this receptionist and a maid has been murdered. Really unsettling start that I think really just kind of lingers over the first stretch of the movie.
Yeah, on rewatch, I can't tell if that happened the night before or not.
That could be.
Because he gets in the car and says there was a problem with the maid, and I wonder when that problem occurred, just based on hearing things, because we can hear the cicadas in the background, which ostensibly indicate that this is a previous struggle, not a current struggle. But then that blood didn't seem congealed, and, you know, it's, you know, you can only demand so much of a film, I suppose, but I definitely was curious.
Yeah. And on the topic of those two particular characters who kind of just set things in motion, but then ultimately, you know, aren't vital to where the narrative ends up. How do you respond to the involvement of those characters?
Very highly after hearing the commentary that informed me of who they were. That the younger one had just gotten out of prison. The older one was his uncle coming to pick him up.
Oh, wow, detail.
They needed to get money. And apparently the actors created that backstory for themselves, and then Cronenberg adapted it and made it part of the film, though it's a silent part. And they were just going to get some money on the way to where they were going. And they picked the wrong place to get coffee and rob, you know?
That they did.
I guess one motif that will inform everything that we're going to have a conversation about is this is clearly a statement, a examination of Americana post, you know, the height of America in the 1960s when these American dreams and illusions were created. We recently watched a numerous amount of classics from directors such as Mervyn LeRoy, Preston Sturges, and John Huston. Within those films, there are diners, very similar to the Stall Diner. Those diners are robbed, very similar to the Stall Diner. To me, this is very much a film that is informed by the previous history of film in making clever allusions to motifs that exist within film history. And that's where I found the film to be the most interesting that it became.
I completely agree. And I think I get more out of that in the first half of the movie than the second half, where it feels like this American... this idyllic American experience is disrupted by something out of this guy's past. Whereas the final third, I would say, is pulp thriller. I think some of the signifiers about American experience sort of fall away in the final act, I guess.
Yeah, it's almost like reverse, The Naked City. Like, it's the reverse of The Naked City, in which our villainous hero does not get away with murder. Here, he gets away with massive amount of murder. Yeah, it would seem. It ends on a hopeful note, silently, while they're having dinner.
Yeah. Which is sort of a hopeful note, but not exactly a upbeat finale.
It's upbeat for a moment when he opens the door and the son and Maria Bello react to the door being open. And then it's cute when the daughter gets up and sets the table, and she has the knife facing as opposite the way that it could possibly face properly. There's just something cute and familial about that seems like the same family that was comforting her in the beginning from her nightmare, all on the same bed, is about to come back. And to me, the visual language of that is where Cronenberg exists and has continued to exist as just a visual master of informing you through passive things that just are facts when you look at them.
Yeah, and I think idea-wise, it definitely works for me just in displaying the difficulty in accepting someone when they aren't who you thought they were. I think that's a really simple kind of theme that it executes in that final shot quite well. So yes, I think it's a strong finish.
Yeah, I think the idea of accepting someone for not who they are starts before that, even with Maria Bello, when she knows that he's Joey, and specifically that second scene of sexuality in which they have sex on the stairs. And, it's a very fraught scene. There's a lot of early criticism about the film that claimed that it was a rape scene. But if you watch it, it's very clearly a complex sexual thing, which doesn't really exist in film once again. And I know when I was younger, I was like, what is going on? And now it's it's one of those scenes that seems the most fascinating that it was smuggled into a project like this. Because apparently it wasn't in the graphic novel originally. She had just gone upstairs. And in it, he behaves kind of abhorrently. He hits her and pins her to the stairs, grabs her throat and kisses her, and then stops himself and backs away, and then she grabs him and brings him back in. And it's that grabbing him and bringing him back in that make it so complex and interesting. And I mean, getting into how the sausage is made, apparently they shot for a whole day, and both of them were just covered in bruises.
Oh, I believe it. It doesn't look like a comfortable experience.
It does not.
Yeah. I mean, I think the movie's always kind of making some statement about violence, in various scenes. Violence can be random. Violence can be heroic. And I think that's one of the more maybe provocative suggestions, which is that violence can be arousing.
Or erotic.
Yeah, for sure. Which, is just to each his own in that scene. I think I completely understand someone not going for it. I think that is just taste and sensibility related.
Absolutely. But I do think it's a deeply human scene. I think that's one of the things about Cronenberg is his body horror. There's something deeper happening with the statements that he's making, almost always there's something more about the human condition, the human experience, the human past, right? This is a history of violence. It's not talking about the history of your species. But at work is the history of your species, which is a violent species, is a warring species. And I think that the psychological truths of our violence as a species depicted in these characters is what makes this film, in the end, interesting. And all of his projects are similar in that way, I think.
Yeah, I think in different directions, he kind of likes to just push the limits of what's comfortable. And I think this is one that's sort of interesting for how it kind of straddles the feeling of a mainstream dramatic thriller with something that's a little more idiosyncratic. And whether it's the graphic violence when you're seeing someone's nose get just destroyed, or the sort of jarring sexuality in that scene, I think that's where mainstream audiences that would respond to many other things would find themselves maybe taken aback a little bit.
Yes, I completely agree. I remember some of the criticism at the time about that, which is probably why I was interested in the film, because anytime someone says, don't watch something because of this reason, I say, I have to watch it because someone said not to for this reason. Yeah. That's just who I am. And I think with these Cronenberg films kind of in a row, starting from when he began to get bigger studio funding and releasing in theaters, they start from this low budget body horror, exploding bodies, people getting decapitated or ripped apart, or
vivid stuff,
wombs separate from the body and attached, into more mindful criticisms of society. And this is that weird place in between, project-wise, where he hasn't moved all the way to psychology. A Dangerous Method comes later, which is literally a psychological film about Freud and Jung. But then his last film that he's made up to this point was A Map to the Stars, in which John Cusack plays a total bullshit therapist who's actually kind of a terrible person. And that he stayed married to his sister. And is kind of doing that thing that we see in The Brood with Julianne Moore, with making her say those types of words that are said in The Brood and blaming everything on people that aren't herself, which is it is Freudian in a sense, but it's also totally against the point that Freud was making about personal ownership. And I think that his evolution really took place during this film, and it's just so interesting to see the first 2/3 work so well in the last third to I don't know how you would really break it down, but basically after the stair scene, everything just seems kind of bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still entertained. I think the craft holds up for me through everything with William Hurt and the climax, but I do think thematically it becomes a little less rich.
It's I don't know. For me, it was amusing and campy on rewatch.
Yeah,
it wasn't unpleasant to view, but it was campy. It was absurd. It was this is a mob family that isn't actually Italian. I learned in the commentary that he decided to make them Irish, which there's I don't know how easy that is for me to buy into. It's not easy. I do know. It's not easy for me to buy into at all. I just have a hard time believing in the logistics of the film after a certain point. And that's where my deeper criticism of the film comes, other than the son's performance.
Yeah, I would agree. After a certain point, it's just about the bloody violence after a certain point, which is fine. It's entertaining enough for me, but yeah, it's structurally kind of a reverse revenge story in the sense that we're used to revenge stories being about our protagonist exacting his revenge on somebody, and in this case, it's really about William Hurt's character and this group discovering him, realizing he's still there, and them trying to exact their revenge on him. And that sort of revenge element with the strong silent dad really leads me to put this more in the like category of movies like Taken. Like, I think this is sort of an interesting precursor to like the violent dad genre. Like, if this was made in 2020, Liam Neeson could very easily be cast in this role. And
I don't know. I feel like it would have been easier for him when he was younger to do exactly the logistics.
Perhaps. I guess I don't know how old Liam Neeson is.
Yeah,
now,
if he would have been viewed the way he is now, contemporarily, I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
the dad idea. Fair enough.
The American dad protecting his family with a violent past, capable of more than people thought he was. Like, that seems that idea, while this feels Cronenbergian in a way in its aesthetics, feels like a very sort of like American mainstream idea, which just struck me as interesting. And in that sense is sort of anomalous within Cronenberg's filmography, even though it feels like his in other ways.
Yeah, totally off on a tangent.
Do it.
If this is good, we'll go with it. I don't feel comfortable using the word surrealism with him at all, because everything is so matter of fact. But there isn't like an unrealistic quality to his films where they're embedded in realism, but you're also willing to accept everything that's unreal about them. And I think that part of that here is like that the town doesn't really seem legitimate. That the artifice of the family doesn't feel entirely whole. One thing that I reflected on after watching A Map to the Stars, after I'd watched this the first time, was that I'd never seen until A Map to the Stars that I recall a Cronenberg film in which there's a pet. I subsequently then watched The Fly recently, in which he does have two laboratory testing baboons that are also maybe pets, but it feels very weird for a family of four with all this property to not have any pets. And I think that there's just these little things, whether they're deliberate or not, that feel unreal, but also don't separate you from believing in the film. He straddles a weird line that I don't quite know how to define, and I find very, very interesting artistically.
Yeah. I think I could see that. An example that maybe comes to mind for me is when Viggo Mortensen's character walks into his diner for the first time, and his coworker is relating a dream to a client about, or not a dream, he's relating his experience with a past girlfriend
wife,
or maybe it was a wife.
That's how the story ends. The girlfriend was a wife,
right?
For
exactly.
6 years,
who had violent nightmares and woke up one night and actually stabbed him with a fork. There is something,
and blood spurt everywhere.
Yeah, like I can understand someone maybe calling that a little on the nose and being another little comment about some kind of violence in a movie that is about violence in many ways, but it also is sort of striking in this like little quaint American town to have this little strange kind of anecdote as he's walking into work for the day. Another bit that I think I could see falling under this sort of unreality that you're talking about. It's a little strange.
Like, you can't separate him from the genre idea of realism, but there's also something inherently unreal, right? Like, Videodrome, while extremely realistic and embedded in realism, is also embedded in unrealism. I think Existenz is the exact same, personally. And that motif, it's in his work all the way back in Stereo, in which you're supposed to put on your own personal piece of audio, whatever you prefer, while you watch this film that is kind of about the same psychological supposings, but in like a student film format that's very low budget. He's just one of those curious directors that doesn't really have a way to tell a story that is commercial, which I also find deeply appealing. Like, he's not a commercial director by any means. This is his most commercial film, and we have all these reasons for why it's not commercial, which seems I don't know, substantive and of value to me.
Yeah. I would think maybe The Fly would be the next most commercial, despite being so kind of wild in its practical effects and it just being kind of a gross out kind of appeal. I think that was one that did have quite, was quite successful commercially,
it had a large amount of commercial success, but like if I told you that Hereditary was a commercially successful film, you'd be like, wait, what? Like just based on synopsis. I think The Fly is the same thing where it just hit a cultural moment in which it was able to succeed because of a bunch of different factors that are unpredictable. But I think that as a director, he didn't seek to make something commercial. It accidentally succeeded in the commercial format.
Yeah, I would agree. Cast-wise, we have covered who we did not care for. Standouts otherwise in terms of who you did like or what you did like.
I think Maria Bello's doing an incredible amount of work, and then anytime Viggo Mortensen's in anything, I'm always content and happy with his performance. Just the way that he holds his shoulders differently, the way that he can do two different accents, contort his face, behave as if he took damage somewhere. He's a wonderfully expressionistic actor with his body.
Yeah, I would agree. It was kind of a relief to me that, he is the kind of upstanding American family man, but he's not exactly the strong and silent type. Yes, he is kind of a man of few words, but there's also kind of a softness to him. Like, he seems very kind and very gentle, very humble. Like, I don't think like this is the kind of guy who's going to be talking about himself in any way if you had him over for dinner. I think you go further into the mainstream, you find these kinds of American male heroes that lack that same kind of just humility that you just sense in like his body language, which I think is sort of a nice contrast with how kind of tough Maria Bello's character is. And she has a little bit more, maybe not more, but she is very self-confident. I think there's
expressive, loud, non-quiet about how she's feeling and in what she thinks.
Exactly. Like, I think there's just something about how believable to me they are as a married couple, and the extent to which they care about their kids. And I think while this is about him being violent, I could see her being the first one to protect their kids in a different situation, just because of how kind of vigorous she is in her personality, and versus his being a little bit more reserved. I don't know. I just think there's sort of an interesting complement of temperaments between them that's very convincing as a married couple.
I completely agree, but also have a hyphen / point parentheses in which I would say that Tom does. Tom Stahl is all of those things. However, Joey is not. Mm-hmm. And I think that Tom and that personality within this film exist in relation directly to Maria Bello's character. You say that you believe that she would protect them. I say there's physical evidence in the film of her arriving back home without having had any conversation with a fucking restraining order against Ed Harris. Mm-hmm. And I say, maybe she wouldn't wield a gun first, but she'll go use the law to protect her family before even asking. No second thoughts about it, which is very assertive and the opposite of the Tom that we get to know. But then there's Joey, who seems like he might be a chatterbox when he's well lubricated, or when he's in the middle of asserting his dominance through violence in any situation. It doesn't necessarily seem like he's loud, but it doesn't seem like he has the same qualities of conversation and being limited that Tom does. And I think that's kind of, that gets at something deeper in all of Cronenberg's films, in which characters aren't just one thing. In The Brood, the mother character isn't just a mother. She's a different type of mother, with psychic control. Right? In A Map to the Stars, Mia Wasikowska isn't just a girl who almost accidentally killed her famous little brother. She is the daughter of incest, who then brutally murders Julianne Moore with a statue that was earned for, being fake very well, essentially. Mm-hmm. There's a biting criticism about the duality of people in all Cronenberg films. Most eloquently illustrated by there's never been a insect politician, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think a little bit about this theme to me about, maybe not in all of the films, but in some of them, like this or The Fly, kind of about the limits of love, and when you realize someone isn't who you thought they were, or you see them transform, or you understand that they've transformed, how that does sort of challenge your understanding or your affection from them. Those aren't exactly the right words, but I think about, Gina Davis's character still very much loving Jeff Goldblum despite this viscerally ugly transformation he's going through, and him desperately reaching out saying, help me be human, and that being very, very, very difficult. And that, it's maybe a stretch, but I feel like there's a shared theme there between that and something like this, with his family struggling to accept what transformation a member of their family has gone through and that they never knew about.
I don't think that's a stretch at all, because that's the same thing in The Brood. That's the same thing in Eastern Promises, when the behavior doesn't match up who the person's supposed to be, specifically in the case of Naomi Watts' interactions with Viggo Mortensen, in which he's supposed to be this thing, but then whenever no one's around, he's behaving like someone who isn't this thing that they should be. Mm-hmm. And then a Dangerous Method is, extremely complex. I won't even begin to go into that, but Cosmopolis, we see the duality from one side of the road to the other on the way to get a haircut. And how memory and all that stuff can affect your behavior, which is another theme that's explored again in A Map to the Stars. Yeah, I think it's everywhere.
Cosmopolis is like one long, slow, weird transformation to a bad haircut.
It sounds kind of like Now.
It does. I remember thinking that felt a little too close to reality. I will say that I think the pivot point here, where we go from there being a little bit of mystery to his past to him actually owning up to it with Maria Bella when he's in a hospital. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I feel like that moment falls a little flat in terms of that being sort of the turning point of the film. He sort of just kind of confesses, and she has this sort of violent, sickening reaction to it, which I don't totally buy.
If it makes you feel better, that was her decision.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And then they feel better or worse.
And then they built the bathroom just for her to do that, because she decided that's what the character would do.
And I think that is justifiable logically. I can imagine someone having a violently sickening reaction to it, but I don't know if the performance totally works, and I just feel like that turning point is lacks a little force somehow when he just says, I thought Joey was gone. I think it feels like a missed opportunity. What about you?
I think that I completely agree with what you're saying, with the caveat that it works the first time, or it works when you don't remember the movie. But as soon as you rewatch it with the context of knowing the film, there's an issue there. There just is. It's forced. It's trying to force a point that is naturally arrived at without having that there. So you're hitting the nail too many times. You're denting the wood at this point. And normally that's not something Cronenberg does. So it is especially obvious that it's a miss and that it's not his style.
I agree. The one thing I like about that, and that is sort of an element of the movie I like, is in the dialogue lines where he says something like, I spent 3 years trying to get rid of Joey. I went out to the desert and thought I had gotten rid of him. All these lines that kind of allude to these other parts of these characters' histories that we never really get details about. It's all just very suggestive and sort of ambiguous, and I find that very rich and sort of interesting, because it just sort of fills out this picture in your head about what these people have done, might have done. That's kind of unusual, I think, for this genre that in some ways is mainstream to throw out some suggestions about what these people have done at different points in their life that we never get any closure on.
I completely agree, but you just brought up something that I have to ask you. What genre would you say this film is in?
Probably dramatic thriller is how I would describe it. What about you?
Well, let me first say that I thought that you were alluding to comic book films in general, and I was like, it's very nuanced for like them to make a reference to things that aren't going to be in a sequel.
Oh, I see. I can see that.
Yeah, I would say this is, more of a thriller first, and then a piece of drama / eroticism second, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I find it most interesting when it's doing its examinations of Americana, but I mean, if you're going to label the film, you have to label it for its throat stomps and its nose smashes. Since you did not watch any of the commentary or special features, it sounds like, one thing I will say is scene 44 was cut, and scene 44 was a scene in which Viggo is having a nightmare / dream where he's at work at Stahl's Diner, and Ed Harris sits down and says, "I'm going to kill you," with sunglasses on. And he shoots him. He picks up a shotgun and shoots him in the chest. His chest explodes, classic David Cronenberg style. Think like Videodrome when the chest cavity's open and the gun disappears. And he walks up to him on the floor, and there's just this oozing, ribby, bone, open hole mess. And they chose to remove that from the film. So there was originally the Cronenberg gore, and he chose to remove it for the project. And I guess my whole point here was like, this is where I see that shift, and I shot it, but I don't want it in here. Let's pull back. And then just pulls back every single film subsequently following this. From my perspective, like I think that Brood and The Fly and Videodrome and Existenz are so wholly different in their body horror than these films, but this film and the films that follow still have the body horror present. There's still an element of terror in what's going to happen to Paul or Robert in Cosmopolis. There's a scene in the Russian baths in Eastern Promises that is an extended violence scene with fucking knives, and Viggo Mortensen is naked fighting two leather-clad Russian agents with knives. He's hanging full dong. And it is terrifying to watch that fight scene, because it's terrifying to watch someone fight naked. It hits that human level. And so I think he still has the body horror, but he goes to a totally different visual communication of it. And I feel like this is the film where that transformation took place, because I've seen Existenz immediately previous to it, which is, very much about body horror.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like that scene, had it been included, would have been the most visceral image in the film. And I can appreciate some restraint on that front, because it would only, to some extent, have diminished the other graphic images that we do get that are, arguably unnecessary, but leave an impression. Like when we cut to the criminal who Viggo has shot in the diner, and his cheek is just shredded, absolutely shredded.
But it's the shredded part is facing down, so you can't see as much of it. It's there. There's blood pooling. You can see some shredding, but it's not as in your face as it would have been in 1989 to 1994, it seems. Yeah,
and that's, just judgment that a director has to choose. Like, do you go a little bit bigger and risk having those other shots become a little more forgettable because you've upped the ante? I can appreciate having shot that scene, which could not have been easy, and then decided, no, I want them to remember the scene where Viggo destroys this guy's nose, because that was also quite brutal.
Yes. Yeah, I think there's something about this film that wouldn't work with dream sequences. It would limit the reality and the tangible fun. Like, I would question whether or not anything is real if they introduced that dream quality to it, I think, especially from Viggo's character.
I agree. I like it staying firmly in non-dreamland.
David Cronenberg has what I think is one of the most delicious quotes that has ever graced the world.
Your ears?
Through my ears especially, but all readers' ears and listeners' ears at this point. This is paraphrasing. I don't have it exactly how he said it, but he essentially said, 2 people in a room. That's all. 2 people in a room is the primordial ooze of cinema. It's the hardest thing to do, and it's the most base thing to do. But without it, you don't have cinema. And I think that reflecting on this film, that is absolutely true. It's the 2 people in a room. And it doesn't have to be a room, but it, that essentially works in its dioramic quality. Whether you're looking at the end with the absolutely farcical moment of William Hurt holding his keys to open the door and the door opening and him getting shot in the head, that's just 2 people in a room, essentially, in an entryway. Maria Bello and Vigo, 2 people in a room. Him and his son, 2 people in a room. Those are the moments that define cinema, and I think define his filmography in being what it is. It's those 2 people in a room moments with Candy and her father in The Brood, where he's trying to console his daughter and take these photos of her back that's been beaten by her mother, but he can't tell her what happened or get it out of her. It's those intangibles that I think really make Cronenberg's work sing.
Yeah, for as much of a mark as the physical violence itself can lead, I think some of my favorite scenes are the ones with Ed Harris, where he's just repeatedly insisting that he is Joey Cusack, and he keeps calling him Joey at the end of every sentence. And the charge in those moments is so real and vivid, and those, I think, are some of the most striking moments in the movie. Especially when it's between him and Maria Bello at the mall. And that just kind of ominous threat he poses, I think is super compelling. And I love that line he gives towards the end of that encounter where she's come out of a shoe store and he says, "Don't forget your shoes," or something like that. I mean,
she's walking away and he says, "Don't forget your shoes."
Sometimes the violence here is limited to a shot or two. I could easily do without it and be fine, because I think those moments really kind of have an unease to them that's very rich. Yeah,
there's a pulpy atmosphere to it. There's bubbling lava. It might be cooling, but there's still the lava underneath that is terrifying, because you don't know if he's going to pull out a gun and shoot her daughter in the middle of the mall or not. And the fact that you don't know and nothing happens just makes you more nervous because nothing happened yet.
Absolutely. And I think that dispels a little bit once we actually arrive at William Hurt's place. It just feels like we're in genre territory at that point.
Which genre?
Just a weirder one, I guess.
Yeah. A disappointing one.
That world feels a little more sealed off kind of once you step in the house. It just feels like we've shifted gears a little bit, and it's just the
it almost
pulp
seems
entertainment.
Plasticky to me. Like there's an unreal, like I just can't believe that they are where they are in a weird way. Where like as much as I don't like the film Knives Out, I think that I absolutely believe that I'm in that manse in Knives Out. I didn't feel like I was actually at this location, which is weird because that's like one of the only times that's happened, and I just watched a lot of David Cronenberg films back to back to back. This is the one and only time that I think I can say that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if it's just kind of the size of the shift in where we have been versus where we end up, which is this town that we spend so much time in is so quaint in its American feel, to then end up in this sort of ritzy mansion where Williams Hurt, his clothes even kind of feel a little off to me. There's something about it, like what he's wearing, that looks a little cheap in contrast to where he's living, which is odd to me. That's just a random nit, I guess. I don't know that it totally works. At the same time, I'm kind of entertained by it, so I can't find myself knocking it too much. I think I may be sounding more negative than, compared to how I really just very easily watch that finale.
Yeah, I guess I would say that I felt like I was in a serious drama, and then I felt like I was watching John Wick. And I didn't like when I felt like I was watching John Wick the second time. But the first time it's fun. The second time when I'm just there for the film experience and to try to pick up on nuances.
Not much nuance there.
There was not. And this is an interesting movie in that there's very little nuance. Like there's everything you see the first time is kind of all there is to see, which
Agreed.
Isn't a bad thing. I think that this is one of the first times where I've like witnessed that. I can guarantee that there's nothing more than what you see. And this is one of those things where there's nothing wrong with that in this case. Now, there's other films, other directors in which that would be absolutely true. But I think that with Cronenberg here, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And if you go back and watch his earlier films, there is a lot more that you can see on repeated viewing. But I think with The Fly, there probably isn't. You're really not going to get anything new out of watching The Fly if you've just watched it. You're not going to pick up on any certain thing, you know. You might have missed something, but you're not going to pick up on something new and intangible that's informative the way that you would by rewatching The Brood, maybe, or Existence, or A Dangerous Method, or Cosmopolis, in which there might be lines of dialogue that Robert Pattinson's delivering that you just don't quite let seep into you, and then after knowing where the film ends up, you go, "Oh wow!"
Yeah. I agree. I don't think I discovered anything on second viewing that I didn't pick up on the first time. I would completely agree. I think certain things remain equally enjoyable, whether it's just, you know, compelling performances and the craft that is just kind of inherently kind of off kilter that I really respond to. But there is only so much to peel back. I would agree. Yeah,
unsettling's cool, but there's not too much further, especially in this project. I guess, do you have a favorite scene?
I think I like the scenes with Ed Harris the most. I kind of like I think I heard that William Hurt was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this role. I personally prefer Ed Harris's role in this much more than what William Hurt does. I like the interaction between him and Maria Bello at the mall because of how that just sort of suggests some things about her character and her, you know, what she would do to defend her kids. I think there's just some passion to that performance that I really like, and he is only digging into his chilling effect there. I like that confrontation. I'll go with that one. What about you?
I think that I'll go with the scene that I already described pretty much in detail, in which Joey is fully a character at this point that Maria Bello is aware of, and he chases her up the stairs, which was added by David Cronenberg, and then they proceed to have the most complex sex that I've really seen in film that's consensual.
Picking the sex scene.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, because just performance-wise, I mean, no padding, those stairs, quite the performance from those actors, but just the cinematography and the nuance to tell that part of the story there. I think that without it, there's a whole piece of these characters that just doesn't work, and that just informs everything with her desire for him and her disgust in herself immediately after the act. That's just so rich and so unique, and I just really appreciate that.
I like it. I'll ask one arguably a little bit more of a frivolous question, but the title itself, I'm a little mixed on. I think even including the word violence in the title kind of undermines a little bit of the fun in letting us decide for ourselves the ways in which this is about violence. Do you have any feelings about that?
I think that A History of Violence is a really good marketing title. I think it's very marketable, which is something that I wouldn't say Cronenberg just passively is. But I don't totally dislike it. It informs me of violence. If anything, I expected more violence.
Yeah, I would agree.
But I don't know that I have a good read on a different title. Like, stalling out in America.
Yeah, I have no alternate suggestions, that's for sure. It's just one of those things where it's so tempting to say that this movie is quote-unquote about violence. To just give that to us right at the get-go seems like a misstep, maybe, for a movie that's...
And maybe the history didn't go deep enough. There's a lot of angles to take. I think that all in all, I don't think it's a bad title. I think they could have done better, but I can't off the top of my head.
I cannot either, so I guess I shouldn't complain. I'll go with it.
On to side effects?
On to side effects. And that's another one in the can.
Now you don't.